The hair tie was purple. A small, stupid, ordinary thing, the kind you buy in a 12-pack from the drugstore and lose half of within a week, and it was sitting in the cup holder of my husband's truck like it had every right to be there. My name is Mara, I'm 34, and 3 weeks after I gave birth to our third child, I found it while looking for a burp cloth I thought I'd left in the back seat. I want to tell you honestly, I almost didn't notice it. That's the part that still unsettles me most, looking back, how close I came to just brushing it aside, tossing it into the console with the loose change and gas receipts, the way you do with 100 small mysteries in a house that runs on 3 hours of sleep and a newborn who won't settle unless she's pressed against your chest. I have 3 kids. Wyatt is 7, all elbows and questions, the kind of kid who narrates his own life out loud whether or not anyone's listening. Lily is 4, still young enough to believe I have unlimited patience, which most days I don't, though I try. And Josephine, Josie, was 3 weeks old that morning, asleep in the carrier against me while I stood in our gravel driveway in Asheville, holding a hair tie that wasn't mine between my thumb and forefinger like it might tell me something if I looked at it long enough. Dean and I have been married 9 years. He's a contractor, good at it, respected around town, the kind of man other men call when their deck is rotting or their bathroom needs gutting. We met when I was 25, waiting tables at a place on Haywood Street that's closed now, and he used to come in after work covered in drywall dust, ordering the same burger every time, and there was something about the specific, uncomplicated way he wanted things, a beer, a booth by the window, me, that felt like relief after years of dating men who wanted things I couldn't name. For most of those 9 years, it looked like something good. Not perfect, we fought about money sometimes, about whose turn it was to deal with his mother, about the years I spent building my freelance design business from our kitchen table while he built his crew from a single pickup truck and a stack of business cards he'd printed himself. But it looked like love, mostly, and I believed in it more than I second-guessed it. I wasn't naive. I want to be clear about that. I was hopeful, which is a different thing, though it took me most of that spring to understand the difference between the two. I stood there in the driveway a long moment, the hair tie in my hand, Josie's small weight rising and falling against my chest, the June morning already warm enough that I could smell the cut grass from 2 yards over, and some part of me, the tired, postpartum, hormonally scrambled part, decided this meant nothing. Dean's crew was mostly guys in their 40s and 50s who'd been laying tile and framing houses since before I was born, but he'd recently brought on a young electrician for the bigger jobs, a woman named Ash I'd met exactly once, at a 4th of July barbecue the summer before, where she'd shaken my hand and complimented Josie's nursery, which at the time had been nothing more than a Pinterest board and a paint swatch taped to the wall. Maybe the hair tie was hers. Maybe it belonged to a client's daughter, left behind during a walkthrough. There were 100 boring explanations, and I reached for the most boring one, because I had a newborn who needed feeding in 20 minutes and a body that still ached in places I hadn't known could ache, and I did not have room, that morning, for a mystery. I dropped the hair tie in the console, next to a crumpled gas receipt and a phone charger cord that had been there longer than I could remember. I found the burp cloth wedged under the passenger seat, stiff with dried spit up. I went inside. That night, after Josie finally settled into a stretch of sleep long enough for me to close my eyes, I lay in the dark next to Dean, listening to him breathe, and the hair tie surfaced in my mind again, small and purple and stubborn, refusing to be as unimportant as I'd decided it was in the driveway that morning. I turned onto my side, facing his back, the familiar shape of his shoulder rising and falling, and I thought about saying something. "Hey, whose hair tie is in your truck?" 6 words. I had them ready in my mouth. I didn't say them. I told myself I was too tired to have a conversation that might turn into an argument over nothing, that I didn't have the emotional reserves, 3 weeks postpartum, to manage his defensiveness on top of my own exhaustion. It felt, in that moment, like the responsible choice, the choice of a woman conserving what little energy she had for the things that actually mattered. I didn't yet understand that this was the first of many moments where I would choose not to ask the question, and that each time I made that choice, I was quietly agreeing to let something keep happening without my permission. I had no idea, lying there in the dark, how much was already happening just outside the edge of what I could see. The weeks after Josie's birth had a particular texture to them, a blur of feedings and diaper changes and the specific exhaustion that lives behind your eyes and doesn't leave even when you finally get to sleep. Dean had taken 2 weeks off work when she was born, which felt, at the time, like devotion. He'd held her at 3 a.m. so I could shower. He'd taken Wyatt and Lily to school so I could stay in bed an extra hour, sunlight cutting slow gold lines across the ceiling while I drifted in and out, grateful in a way I didn't examine too closely. I remember thinking, in the fog of those early days, that we were doing this together, the way we'd done the other two. Then he went back to work, and something in the rhythm of the house shifted in a way I couldn't immediately name. He started leaving earlier. Not dramatically, 20 minutes here, half an hour there, but the pattern was there if you looked for it, and I wasn't looking for it, not yet. He said the Fairweather job, a big renovation on a lake house out past Weaverville, needed him on site before the crew arrived, something about scheduling deliveries and getting ahead of the electrical inspection. It was a reasonable explanation. Everything, in those early weeks, had a reasonable explanation, and I had a newborn who ate every 2 hours and 2 other children who needed lunches packed and permission slips signed, and I did not have the bandwidth to hold every reasonable explanation up to the light. He'd started showering before dinner instead of after. I noticed it the way you notice a change in furniture arrangement without immediately being able to say what's different, a low hum of unfamiliarity in a familiar room. When I asked him about it, half joking, balancing Josie on my shoulder while stirring a pot of pasta with my free hand, he said the job site was dusty and he didn't want to hold the baby covered in drywall grit and sawdust. It made sense. It made so much sense, in fact, that I felt slightly foolish for having noticed it at all. Something tightened low in my chest when I asked him that, small and quick, gone before I could name it. I told myself it was nothing. I had a newborn and 2 other kids and a body still healing from a birth that had torn more than the doctor expected, stitches that pulled every time I stood up too fast, and I didn't have the bandwidth to interrogate a shower schedule. Priya called that week, the way she always did, checking in with the particular warmth of a friendship that had survived 12 years, 3 apartments, 1 divorce, hers, not mine, and more late-night phone calls than I could count. We'd met freshman year of college, in a dorm hallway argument over a shared bathroom schedule that had somehow turned into 4 hours of talking and a friendship that outlasted every boyfriend either of us had had before our husbands. She asked about Josie, about how I was healing, about whether I was sleeping at all. It was a normal call. It should have felt normal. But there was a beat, near the end, where I mentioned offhand that Dean had been staying late at the Fairweather site more than usual, and Priya went quiet for just a half-second too long before she said, brightly, too brightly, well, you know how contractors are during a big renovation. All hands on deck. And then she changed the subject to Josie's sleep schedule so smoothly that if I'd been anyone other than someone who'd known her for 12 years, I wouldn't have noticed the seam. I didn't ask her what she meant by that pause. I told myself I was imagining things, that sleep deprivation makes you paranoid, makes you read tea leaves into ordinary silences. Looking back now, I understand that pause wasn't nothing. It was Priya, for 1/2 second, almost telling me the truth, and then choosing not to. If you've ever had a friend go quiet in exactly the wrong place in a conversation, you know that particular unease, the sense that something just moved underneath the surface of a normal moment, and you can't decide if you actually felt it or made it up. Wyatt mentioned, at dinner one night, mouth full of mac and cheese, that Dad's truck was at the coffee place with the blue sign again when he'd been dropped off at his friend Miles's house that morning. I didn't think much of it. Dean drank coffee. Coffee places existed, there was nothing inherently strange about a man getting coffee before work. But I filed it away in the same drawer where I'd already put the hair tie, the earlier mornings, Priya's half-second pause, a growing collection of small, unconnected things that individually meant nothing and together were starting to accumulate a weight I hadn't yet let myself feel. There was, that same week, a $340 charge on our joint credit card from a home goods store I didn't recognize, dated a Tuesday when I remembered Dean saying he'd been at the lumber yard all day. I brought it up over dinner, and he explained, without missing a beat, that it was materials for a client's custom shelving, reimbursable, he said, already invoiced, nothing to worry about. I let it go. It would take me another 3 weeks to understand that this charge, the one I'd fixated on for days as though it were the real secret, was nothing at all, an actual reimbursable expense, exactly as he'd said, and that I had spent that energy chasing the wrong thread entirely while the real one sat quietly, unexamined, in a cup holder and a shower schedule and a pause on the phone. Dean's phone had started living face down on the counter. He'd always left it face up before, screen lit with whatever notification had last come through, careless in the specific way people are careless about things they've never had reason to hide. Now it lay face down by the coffee maker every evening, and I noticed it the way you notice a chair that's been moved 2 inches from where it always sits, not alarming, exactly, but wrong in a way that itches at the edge of your attention. I said nothing. I told myself, again, that I was tired, that hormones do strange things to a mind 3 weeks postpartum, that suspicion is its own kind of poison, and I didn't want to be the kind of wife who poisoned a good marriage looking for monsters that weren't there. I think now that I told myself that so I wouldn't have to ask the real question underneath it: what happens to my life, to these 3 children, if the monster is actually there? I want to stop here for a second. Because if you've ever kept the house running perfectly while something inside it was quietly falling apart, the lunches packed, the laundry folded, the smiles held in place at pickup, you know exactly what those weeks felt like. You keep functioning because functioning is the only thing that feels safe to do. By week 5, the unease had stopped being something I could set down. Dean came home one evening smelling faintly of a perfume that wasn't mine, not strong, not obvious, just a thread of something floral underneath the sawdust and sweat, gone almost as quickly as I registered it, there and then not there, like a radio station drifting out of range. When I mentioned it, lightly, trying to keep my voice light the way you try to keep your hands steady, he said one of the guys on the crew had a girlfriend who dropped by the site sometimes with lunch, and the smell had probably rubbed off from a hug hello. It was, again, a perfectly reasonable answer, delivered without hesitation, without the small stumble I would have expected from a lie. I want to stop here for a second. Because if you've ever caught a smell that didn't belong and talked yourself out of what it meant because the alternative felt unbearable, you know exactly what that evening felt like. You keep finding reasons to stay in the story where nothing is wrong, because leaving that story means stepping into one you're not ready to survive. I called Priya again that week, later at night than I usually called, Josie finally down, Wyatt and Lily asleep, the house quiet in the particular way it gets when you're the only one awake in it, just the hum of the refrigerator and the tick of the baby monitor's static. I told her about the perfume, the late nights, the phone face down on the counter, half expecting her to tell me I was being paranoid, half hoping she would. She didn't tell me I was being paranoid. She told me, carefully, in a voice that sounded rehearsed in a way I didn't clock until much later, that sometimes after a baby things just feel different for a while, and it doesn't mean anything's actually wrong. It was comforting. It was also, I understand now, a sentence built to keep me from asking the next question. Something in me wanted so badly to believe her that I didn't notice how carefully that sentence had been built. I know some of you already see where this is going. I didn't. Not yet. I still believed, that week, that the worst thing happening in my house was a tired, distracted husband and my own hormonal imagination working overtime. Then, on a Thursday, I found a text notification on the shared family tablet, the one we kept in the kitchen for grocery lists and Wyatt's homework apps, because Dean had accidentally left himself logged into a message thread he'd forgotten wasn't his phone. It was gone before I could read more than a few words, the screen locking automatically after 10 seconds the way it always did, the name at the top just a first initial, A. I stood in the kitchen a long time after that, my heart doing something fast and uneven against my ribs, Josie's monitor crackling faintly on the counter beside me, the dishwasher humming through its rinse cycle like nothing in the world had just shifted. I thought about Ash, the young electrician whose name started with the same letter, and I told myself it was probably a work thread, a subcontractor scheduling conversation, nothing that needed my heart to be doing what it was doing. I didn't ask him. I told myself I needed proof before I could ask, that raising it without something concrete would just give him room to explain it away, and some quieter, more honest part of me knew that wasn't really why. I was afraid that if I asked and he had an answer, I'd believe it, because believing it was easier than what came next. Looking back now, that was the moment I should have just asked the question I kept avoiding. I didn't. And that silence cost me weeks I can't get back. If you've ever been the person everyone counts on but no one accounts for, stay with me. Because what I found next changed everything, and I wasn't remotely ready for it. That night I barely slept, not because Josie needed me, she had, for once, a decent 4-hour stretch, but because my mind wouldn't stop circling the same loop: the hair tie, the perfume, the pause in Priya's voice, the letter A on a locked screen. I lay in the dark next to Dean, listening to him breathe evenly beside me, the ceiling fan turning its slow circle above us, and felt something in my chest tighten so completely I had to sit up and put my hand flat against my sternum, just to remind myself I could still take a full breath. I didn't confront him. Not yet. I told myself I needed to know more first, and if I'm honest, some part of me still needed, for just a little longer, to live in the version of my life where none of this was actually happening. The following week, my mother-in-law, Carol, called to ask if I wanted her to take the kids for a weekend so Dean and I could reconnect, and there was something in the careful way she phrased it: reconnect, not rest, not recover, that snagged in my mind and wouldn't let go. I asked her, half joking, if she thought we needed reconnecting, and she laughed it off too quickly, the same beat too fast laugh Priya had given me weeks earlier, and told me every marriage needs a little tending after a baby. I said nothing more. But the seed was planted, a second person, now, offering me reassurance I hadn't asked for, in a tone that suggested she was reassuring herself as much as me. The name Ash kept surfacing, small and persistent, in 100 tiny ways I could no longer explain away. Dean mentioned her more than he used to. Ash thinks we should push the deadline. Ash is handling the wiring inspection. Ash said the lake house owners want to add another outlet in the kitchen, always work-related, always reasonable, and always, I began to notice, delivered with a specific carefulness, the over-explanation of someone building a case they hadn't been asked to build. I noticed the way he said her name and dismissed it as nothing, a coworker's name mentioned in passing. I didn't yet understand that the amount of explaining a person offers for something no one has questioned is its own kind of confession. I found the Fairweather Jobs crew schedule pinned to the corkboard in Dean's home office one afternoon while looking for a receipt for taxes, Josie strapped to my chest, Lily narrating a puzzle to herself on the office floor, and I noticed, with a coldness that surprised me, that Ash's name appeared on days Dean had told me she wasn't scheduled. I photographed the schedule with my phone before I could talk myself out of it, my hands unsteady enough that I had to take the picture twice. That same week, I drove past the Fairweather site on my way to a pediatrician appointment for Josie's 3-week checkup, not planned, just a route I'd taken 100 times before, and saw Dean's truck parked beside a small blue sedan I didn't recognize, at 10 in the morning on a day the crew schedule said only he and one other worker were on site. I didn't stop. I didn't confront him. I drove past at the speed limit, Josie asleep in her car seat behind me, my hands gripping the wheel so tightly my knuckles ached, and I felt something crack quietly open in my chest that had nothing to do with the birth I was still healing from. I know some of you already recognize this feeling, the one where your body understands something completely before your mind is ready to let the words form. I felt it in my hands first. Then in my throat. The knowing arrived in pieces, the way water finds its way under a door before you notice the flood. I didn't sleep well that whole week. Food sat untouched on my plate at dinner more nights than not. Dean commented on it once, gently, asked if I was okay, and I told him I was just tired from the baby, which was true, and also not remotely the whole truth. My hands had developed a small, persistent tremor I noticed most when I tried to thread Josie's tiny arms through a onesie sleeve, a shake I attributed, out loud, to too much coffee and not enough sleep. I called Priya again, this time asking her directly, did she know anything about someone named Ash? There was a silence on the line long enough that I counted 3 full breaths before she answered, her voice too careful, too measured, each word placed like a foot testing thin ice. I don't really know anything about Dean's work stuff, Mara. You should probably just ask him. It was the kind of answer that told me more by what it avoided than anything it said. That was the second time I should have understood what I was hearing underneath the words instead of the words themselves. I filed it away instead, the way I'd filed away everything else, because I still needed one more piece before I could let myself believe what every piece so far had already told me. That night I made a decision. And if you've ever had to choose between keeping the peace and keeping your own sanity, you understand exactly why I made it. I decided I would stop asking people and start looking myself. The following Tuesday, I found the final piece I needed, and it came the way these things often do, by accident, not by design. I was cleaning out the truck, the way I periodically did, gathering fast food wrappers and Wyatt's dropped toys from the back seat, the June heat already pressing thick and heavy against the metal even at 9 in the morning, and I opened the glove compartment looking for the registration for an upcoming DMV renewal. Underneath the registration, folded small, tucked into the vehicle manual as though someone had wanted it hidden but hadn't quite trusted it to a better hiding place, was a receipt from a motel off Highway 25, dated 2 days earlier, at 11 a.m., a time Dean had told me he was at the Fairweather site all day, a time I had specifically remembered because I'd texted him about a pediatrician follow-up and he hadn't answered until nearly 1. I sat in the driver's seat of that truck for a long time, the receipt in my lap, my hands finally, completely still, in a way they hadn't been in weeks. I didn't cry. I didn't call him. I didn't confront him that night, or the next. I folded the receipt back exactly the way I'd found it, and put it back exactly where it had been, tucked into the vehicle manual, and closed the glove compartment, and went inside to feed my daughter. I want to be honest about why I did that. It wasn't strategy, not entirely. Some part of me needed, just for a little longer, to hold the proof privately, the way you hold your breath before you dive, one last moment of air before everything changes. He told me, much later, what had been running through his mind that same week, in a conversation I never expected to have and never wanted to need. I told myself it was just once, and then I told myself it was just this once again, and by the third time I'd stopped counting because counting meant admitting there was a pattern. Ash made me feel like the version of myself I used to be before I became just dad and the guy who fixes things, before 3 kids and a mortgage and a wife who was always exhausted and never looked at me the way she used to. I told myself Mara had Josie now, had the kids, didn't need me the way Ash seemed to need me, wasn't paying attention anyway. I knew that was a lie even while I was telling it to myself. I just needed it to be true long enough to keep going. The morning she found the motel receipt, though I didn't know yet that she had, I remember standing in the shower afterward feeling something close to relief, like some part of me almost wanted to be caught, because I didn't know how to stop it myself. The confrontation didn't happen the way I planned it, because I hadn't planned it at all. It happened on a Saturday, 3 days after I found the receipt, at a cookout Dean's mother hosted every June, the whole family there, his brother Ray and sister-in-law Nadine, his mother Carol, Priya and her new boyfriend, Wyatt and Lily running through the sprinkler in the backyard while Josie slept against my chest in the carrier, the smell of charcoal and cut grass thick in the June heat. Dean was at the grill, relaxed, laughing at something Ray said, and I was standing near the kitchen door holding my sleeping daughter, watching him, my thumb tracing slow circles against her back, when Priya came up beside me with 2 glasses of lemonade and said, quietly, not looking at me, "You should talk to him. Before it gets worse." Something in me went very still. Talk to him about what, Priya? She didn't answer right away, and in that silence, the exact length of the silence, which I will remember for the rest of my life, I understood that she knew. Not suspected. Knew. "How long have you known?" I said, and my voice came out steadier than I felt, which surprised us both. "Mara." "How long?" She set the lemonade down on the counter behind her, her hand not quite steady, condensation from the glass sliding down onto the wood. "Since March," she said, so quietly I almost didn't hear it over the sound of the kids in the sprinkler. "I told him he had to tell you. I told him I couldn't keep." She stopped. "I'm so sorry. I didn't know how to." I didn't hear the rest, because something in me had already crossed some threshold I hadn't known was there, and before I fully understood what I was doing, I was walking across the yard toward the grill, Josie still sleeping against my chest, my whole body shaking in a way I couldn't control. Dean had spent that whole afternoon relaxed, unguarded, the host's easy, joking version of himself, believing, the way he'd believed for months, that whatever this was, he still had time to manage it on his own terms. Dean. He turned, spatula still in hand, smiling the easy smile he'd worn for the whole party, and the smile didn't fully leave his face even as he saw mine. Hey, everything okay? My chest was on fire. My hands were shaking so hard I had to press one flat against Josie's back just to steady it. I hadn't planned to do this here, in front of everyone, but something in me had stopped being able to wait one more hour. Who is Ash? I said, loud enough that the yard went quiet around us, loud enough that his mother turned from the picnic table, loud enough that Wyatt and Lily stopped in the sprinkler and looked over with the particular stillness kids get when they sense something adult and wrong happening near them. Mara, what? Dean's face shifted, fast, from confusion to something more careful. Can we not do this here? I found the receipt, Dean. My voice cracked on his name, the first crack in a control I'd been holding since March without even knowing I'd been holding it. The motel. Highway 25. 2 days ago, while I was home with your daughter. The yard had gone completely silent except for the hiss of the sprinkler and the low crackle of the grill. Dean's face went through something complicated. I watched it happen in real time, the calculation behind his eyes, the moment he understood there was no version of this he could explain away. You went through my truck, he said, and something in his voice sharpened, turned outward instead of inward. You're going through my things now? After everything I do for this family, you're accusing me in front of my mother based on a motel receipt with your handwriting on it, Dean. My voice was rising now, and I couldn't stop it, 3 months of swallowed suspicion coming up all at once, ugly and loud and completely out of my control. Based on the perfume. Based on the hair tie in your truck. Based on Priya knowing since March and not telling me. Don't bring Priya into this. She's already in this. She's been in this the whole time, apparently, while I was up every night with your daughter wondering why my husband smelled like someone else's perfume. You want to talk about attention? Dean's voice rose to match mine now, sharper, faster, the calm dissolving into something defensive and mean. When was the last time you looked at me like I existed, Mara? You've had your face in that baby for 3 weeks, and before that it was Lily, and before that it was Wyatt. When exactly was I supposed to matter in this house? That is not an excuse for what you did. I'm not making excuses, I'm telling you what it's like to not exist in your own marriage. He'd set the spatula down hard enough that it clattered against the grill's side shelf, and he was fully facing me now, his mother rising halfway from her chair, Ray saying something low and urgent that neither of us heard. You want to stand here in front of everyone and make me the villain, fine, but you don't get to pretend you didn't check out of this marriage the day Wyatt was born and never fully came back. Something in me knew, even as I screamed back at him, that he was using my exhaustion, my motherhood, everything I'd given this family, as a weapon against me, and I couldn't stop it from working, couldn't stop the small, cruel voice in my head that wondered for half a second if some of what he said was true. I hated that voice. I hated him more for putting it there. I checked out because you stopped showing up. I was crying now, ugly and loud, Josie stirring against my chest at the sound of raised voices, her small fists opening and closing in that startled newborn way, and some distant part of me registered that I needed to calm down for her sake even as the rest of me couldn't. 3 weeks postpartum, Dean. 3 weeks, and you were at a motel with a woman half our age while I was home bleeding and exhausted with your newborn daughter. His mother had come around the table now, her face pale, her hand pressed to her mouth. Priya stood frozen by the kitchen door, her boyfriend's hand on her arm, her own face streaked with tears she hadn't bothered to wipe away. Ray had stepped between us, not physically restraining either of us but present, a wall of discomfort neither of us wanted to look at, the role of the mediator, though his timing only seemed to make things louder, not calmer, his hands raised, saying, "Come on, guys, come on," to 2 people no longer capable of hearing him. Everyone needs to calm down, Carol said, her voice shaking, and I turned on her too, unable to stop the momentum of everything breaking loose at once. Did you know? I asked her, and watched her face answer before her mouth did. I suspected, she said quietly. I didn't want to believe it. Something in me went cold at that, colder than the anger, colder than the shame. His own mother had suspected and said nothing, and I understood, standing there in that backyard with my sleeping daughter waking against my chest, that I had been the only person in that entire family who hadn't known. Nadine, Ray's wife, who had said nothing this whole time, finally spoke, quietly, to Dean, not to me. "You need to leave with me and Ray tonight and let her have the house. That's the least you can do." It surprised everyone, including me. Nadine had never been particularly close to me, had always felt like Dean's family more than mine, and yet there she was, drawing a line I hadn't expected her to draw. He finally spoke, later, once the yard had emptied and it was just the two of us in the kitchen, his mother having taken Wyatt and Lily inside to watch a movie, Josie finally quiet against my shoulder, the house gone strange and hollow in the aftermath of everyone leaving. This is what he told me. I don't know how to explain it in a way that doesn't sound like an excuse, because it is one, no matter how I say it. It started in February. You were 7 months along with Josie, and you told me you didn't feel like yourself, didn't feel, I don't know, desirable, I guess, and I told you that was fine, that I understood, and I meant it in the moment. But somewhere underneath that, I started feeling like I'd disappeared too. Like I'd become the guy who pays for things and fixes the sink and nothing else. Ash started at the site in January. She asked me questions about the work, real questions, like she actually cared what I thought, not just what needed fixing next. I told myself it was nothing. I told myself I was just talking to someone who made me feel like I had something to offer besides a paycheck. The first time anything happened was in March, at a bar after a long install, and I told myself it was a one-time thing, that it didn't count because it wasn't planned, because I'd had 2 beers and wasn't thinking straight. I believed that for about a week. Then I stopped believing it and just kept going anyway, because by then I'd already crossed the line and it felt like the damage was already done, so what difference did doing it again make? I told myself things to make it survivable. That you were consumed with the baby and wouldn't notice. That this wasn't really about Ash, it was about me needing to feel like a person again instead of just a function in this house. I told myself I'd stop before Josie was born. Then I told myself I'd stop after she was born, once things settled. I never stopped, and every time I told myself I would, I think some part of me already knew I was lying. I was terrified of you finding out, not because I thought you'd leave, at first, but because I didn't want to see what your face would look like when you understood what I'd become. And I was ashamed, Mara, in ways I don't think you'll believe right now, because I still went to that motel 2 days ago even after Priya told me in March that I had to stop, that she couldn't carry this for me anymore. I heard her. I understood she was right. I went anyway, because by then I think I'd convinced myself that if I couldn't get caught, none of it was real. I got caught. And some ugly, cowardly part of me, standing at that grill an hour ago, still tried to make it your fault instead of just saying I'm sorry, because saying I'm sorry means admitting there's no version of this where I'm not the person who did this to you. He was crying by the end of it, quietly, his hands pressed flat against the counter like he needed something solid to hold on to. I didn't move to comfort him. I stood there with our sleeping daughter against my chest and let him finish, and when he was done, I said the only thing I had left in me. You don't get to cry in front of me and expect that to be enough. I filed for divorce 6 weeks later. The Fairweather job finished without him on it. His business partner took over the remaining contract after 2 clients, hearing about the affair through the small, unforgiving grapevine of a town like Asheville, quietly pulled their referrals. Dean lost half his crew within the year, not because of any legal consequence but because word travels in a trade built on trust and handshake deals, and a man who breaks trust at home tends to find it harder to keep elsewhere too. His mother, who had suspected and said nothing, tried for months to rebuild the closeness we'd once had. I let her back in slowly, carefully, because she wasn't the one who'd broken anything, even if her silence had let it break longer than it needed to. Priya and I didn't speak for almost a year. When we finally did, a coffee, tense and careful, 2 women who used to finish each other's sentences now choosing words like they were walking across ice, she told me she'd been trying, in her own frightened way, to protect me from a truth she didn't know how to hand me directly. I understood it. I didn't fully forgive it, not that day. What we have now isn't what we had before. It's smaller, more careful, honest in a different way than the ease we used to share. I think that's the most either of us could have asked for. Ash left the company within the month, and I never spoke to her, never wanted to. Some things aren't mine to resolve. I moved with the kids into a smaller house on the other side of town that spring, smaller yard, smaller kitchen, a porch just big enough for 2 chairs and a row of potted herbs. I somehow find the energy to water even on the hardest days. Wyatt asked me once, a few months after the divorce was final, if I was sad, and I told him the truth, because he deserved it. Some days, yes. Most days, I'm something closer to free. I think about the hair tie sometimes, that small, stupid, purple thing sitting in a cup holder like it had every right to be there. I think about how close I came to letting it mean nothing, and how much of what followed depended on the fact that, eventually, I stopped letting things mean nothing. I don't know if I'd call that strength, exactly. I think it was just exhaustion finally outweighing fear. Josie is 4 months old now. She doesn't know any of this happened, and someday, if she asks, I'll tell her the truth in whatever form she's old enough to hold. What I know now, standing on the other side of it, is that I am a better mother to all 3 of my children with a whole, honest life than I ever was trying to hold together a marriage that had already quietly ended months before I let myself see it. The most painful detail in this story isn't the motel receipt, and it isn't even the affair itself. It's the length of time Priya carried a secret that wasn't hers to carry, believing, in her own frightened logic, that silence was somehow a form of loyalty. That's a quieter kind of betrayal than Dean's, and in some ways a more universal one, because most of us have been Priya at some point, holding a truth that belongs to someone else, terrified of the damage that speaking it might cause, not realizing that our silence is already doing damage of its own. Dean's affair was, in the end, a story about a man who mistook feeling unseen for a wife who no longer saw him, when the truth was simpler and harder. She was drowning in the same exhaustion he was, just without an escape hatch waiting in a motel off Highway 25. His justification, that Mara had checked out, wasn't entirely fiction, but it was never an explanation for what he chose to do about it. It was a story he needed to believe so the choice would feel survivable. What this reveals about trust within a family isn't only that it can be broken by the person closest to you, but that it can be quietly eroded by everyone around you who chooses comfort over honesty. Mara's growth in this story isn't measured by the explosion in that backyard, that was simply the pressure of months finally finding an exit. Her real growth happened after, in the slow, unglamorous work of rebuilding trust with a friend who'd failed her, and in learning that a marriage held together by exhaustion and denial was never really intact to begin with. The cost of everyone's silence, Priya's, Carol's, even Mara's own reluctance to ask the hard question weeks earlier, wasn't just delay. It compounded the damage, letting a private failure become a semi-public unraveling in front of 2 children who will carry some version of that memory for the rest of their lives. Which leaves the harder question, the one this story never fully answers: how many of the people around a broken marriage already know before the person inside it does, and what do we actually owe each other in that gap between knowing and telling? If I'm honest with you, the detail that stays with me longest isn't Dean at that grill. It's Priya's hand, not quite steady, setting down a glass of lemonade before she finally told me the truth. I think about how long she carried that, and how long I might have carried my own silence if a hair tie hadn't forced my hand. Most of us know, somewhere in our bodies, before we let ourselves know in our minds. The trick is whether we let the knowing take as long as it wants, or whether we finally, exhaustedly, ask the question we've been avoiding. I don't regret the mess of that backyard anymore. I regret the months before it, when I already knew and kept choosing not to. If someone in your life let you down in a way you didn't see coming, or if there's a small, purple, stupid detail you've been quietly not looking at, tell me one word for it in the comments. Thank you for sitting with me through this one. It wasn't an easy story to finally say out loud.